Hi, Professor Pulowski, and hi, anyone who ends up watching this video. Um, if you see me in class, just don't judge me. Hi, I'm Kaylee. I'm going to be talking about the epic hero versus the anti-hero. Obviously, the epic hero is embodied by Aeneas from Virgil's Aeneid. And then the anti-hero is going to be embodied by Jake Barnes, who is from Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. So just to start off, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the archetypes of the epic and the anti-hero and kind of talk about how these two protagonists fit into their categories. So for Aeneas, one of the big things about Greek epic heroes is that they're usually noble-born. In the case of Aeneas, this means he's a demigod. He is the son of Venus. And then also he gets launched into this hero's journey, which is outlined by Joseph Campbell. And he's kind of bound by fate to go on this perilous journey to Italy and establish Rome and become ultimately like the great ancestor of Rome. And then also he's thwarted by an antagonist who is larger than life, particularly Juno, who does not want to see him succeed because she recognizes that his descendants will eventually kind of obliterate Carthage, which is a city that she really loves. And then just personally, he does embody this sense of duty to his men, to his country, to the gods. When I was researching for my final paper, I found this great article by Margaret Finkelberg called Odysseus and the Genus Hero. And what she says about the Odyssey really does apply to Aeneas and the Aeneid. And she says, a hero is one who's prepared to go through life enduring toil and suffering. And I think that Aeneas really embodies that, right? Like he's willing to just go through with his duty at whatever personal cost is necessary. He doesn't seem to really even think about it, honestly. And then just along with that, his physicality is very much that of an epic hero. He's very mighty. He's very strong. He's known to be a very formidable warrior. He has this great rage in battle. I mean, if you're looking at the picture that I have coupled here, you can see him. He's got the shield and the sword. He's very muscular. He's very large physically compared to his opponent, who is laying underneath him. And he's just really someone that you probably don't want to mess with, right? So moving into the anti-hero and how Jake Barnes really kind of plays into that role, he is just kind of this everyman, right? He's very normal. He just kind of is quiet. He works as a newspaper correspondent. In his narration, we see him be very indirect, especially when he talks about his own personal like injuries and what he's sustained throughout the war. And then again, in all of his like, I guess what you could say, confrontational scenes, he really isn't that confrontational. He's just like kind of slightly passive aggressive. And that kind of plays into the idea of the anti-hero. He also has a lot of morally questionable decisions that he makes, right? He's a part of this like party crowd. He drinks to excess. He has an affinity for women. He also has like this capacity for cruelty. I think we see this a lot when he's dealing with Robert Cohn. And he's very self-aware about it, which is noble to a degree, I guess. But a lot of that cruelty is stemming from his own insecurity with his masculinity. And obviously, as we know, World War I, his wounds have kind of rendered him impotent. And so I think that that's a lot of the tension between him and Cohn, is that he's not really able to perform masculinity in the way that he feels he must. While obviously Robert Cohn is a very physical man. He's a boxer. So I am also going to kind of move into scenes that I thought really embody these character ideas. So the first one that I've chosen is from the Aeneid, and this is a lovely painting that goes along with it. This painting was done by Jacob Isaacs van Swanenberg. Really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's titled Sybil and Aeneas in the Underworld. I just really thought that this level of detail was really great in this. I really love the color schemes. It's very, very haunting in a lot of ways. I mean, we're seeing the ship of people who are going over the Acheron River. We're seeing this very in this bottom right-hand corner, this very big mouth of this beast we're obviously seeing Aeneas and Sybil up in the middle upper portion of it. And I just thought it was a very rich, lovely photo, despite how like haunting it is. But I thought that it really kind of embodied the feeling of what the underworld is. So my favorite aspect of Aeneas as a character truly is just this dutiful nature. He cares very deeply for other people. He's very merciful. And I think you especially see this when he's in battle with his fellow warriors, whether they be men fighting for or against him. Um, and I love this character development that we see starting in book 6 when he asks Sybil why some were ferried over and some refused. And he's talking about this in the underworld, and they were not able to cross over the Acheron River. And Sybil responds to him, the ghosts rejected and are the unhappy crew deprived of sepultures and funerals due. So he's seeing these people who did not get proper burials and they're not really able to kind of cross over and have a peaceful resting place. And I think that ultimately in book 11, we see kind of play out into this new idea of battlefield etiquette, for lack of a better term. In book 11, the Latians send a messenger, and he says to the messenger, bear this my message back with ample leave that your slain friends may funeral rites receive. I thought that was really great. He's obviously going through his own amount of grieving because Pallas has just died, and he grants these Latians 12 days of rest to just bury their dead and kind of go through this mourning period. Obviously, it's an act of mercy that he doesn't have to allow at all. He really has no obligation to the other side, but he, as a noble hero, allows it. And I think that that's something that's really great about him as well. He's very merciful, and I think that's a big reason as to why the gods favor him so much. He's very much bound by this duty, but at the same time allows for a lot of humanity. And that's something that I really appreciate about him. And then I also think that I like Jake as a anti-hero, because while being like kind of cruel and like nitty gritty, rough around the edges, like you see that a lot of his resentment comes from the position in which he's placed himself. So I think that one of the first conversations between him and Robert that kind of set this light bulb off my brain was on page 9. Robert is trying to kind of urging him to go to South America with him, and says, we'd have a great trip, like I'll pay for it, yada yada. And he's really just talking about how much he can't stand being in Paris. And Jake says to him, listen, Robert, going to another country doesn't make any difference. I've tried all that. You can't get away from yourself by moving from one place to another. There's nothing to that. And I thought that was really interesting, because we do see a lot of Jake just dealing with his own demons in this scene, right? He's kind of saying like there is this deep amount of resentment, but I think it's because what Robert is vocalizing is what Jake is constantly feeling internally. And it's stuff that he's already kind of grappled with himself. Like he cannot outrun himself. He cannot outrun the past. He's just kind of accepted that he has to live through the discontentment. And he also does say there's no person out there that can really outrun their discontentment. But he says that only an extraordinary few, for Jake in his case, he says that those people are bullfighters. Those people are the people that can outrun that. Which is really interesting, because we see him preaching like this, and then ultimately he goes on his little hero's journey, which takes him to San Sebastian, takes him to Pamplona. So I thought that was really interesting. He seems to have a moral code which he sticks to, but also it's kind of one of those things that is, do as I say, not as I do, which I think is something very characteristic of the anti-hero. I also thought this was really interesting because there is this level of self-awareness, and I can't decide whether or not that makes him better or worse, right? Does his self-awareness, knowing that he could be better or do better, is that good? Or is it the fact that he recognizes that and doesn't do anything about it, is that worse? So I thought that was really interesting as well. And I think that it's one of the reasons why I think that he fits into this role so well. And while overall, I really do think that these two men really kind of cling to these archetypes, there are some areas where you can see that room for ambiguity, right? And I think the two places that you see that in are in the love stories. Obviously, Aeneas loves Dido. He, without a doubt, does in my mind. But ultimately, he's bound by duty and he leaves her. He abandons her. And to make matters worse, she does end up killing herself because of that abandonment. And then that's not really something that you think you'd see with him, right? He is very tender, he is very noble, but ultimately he abandons the woman that he loves. And then Jake, while being this kind of rough around the edges guy who is just kind of resigned to the idea that he maybe will never find love, he has this remarkable patience for Lady Brett Ashley. He just kind of allows her to pop in and out of his life with this just patience that I cannot understand. Especially, when she is saying that she's going to marry Mike and he's still spending all this time with her and kind of pleading with her in some ways, why can't we just live together? Wouldn't that be lovely? And then when she falls in love with Romero, he's still kind of this shoulder to cry on for her. And I just think that that's something that I wouldn't imagine with the other characteristics that he embodies. And then also, I think another place where these men intersect and act in ways that maybe you wouldn't expect is with their realities of war and its aftermath. Obviously, Jake has had to deal with his residual injuries and what that means for him romantically. But I do think that it has given him some appreciation of life and this tenacity that just kind of keep getting through it. And I think that he, in a lot of ways, is a lot more virtuous than the characters in the book. And I think a part of that is to do with kind of this gratitude for still being alive after the war. And then Aeneas, there are times in the epic where I kind of was stumped as to why he would behave in the way that he did. Specifically in book 10, he kills these two Latin warriors who are begging for their lives, and he just doesn't show them any mercy. He just kills them. And it's not really something that I would imagine for someone as noble as him, right? You would imagine that every battle he has would be with a formidable opponent, and it would be something kind of grandiose. But in this moment of maybe frustration or just being plain tired of seeing the realities of war, he just kills them. And so I think it's really interesting that the two places where I see the most intersection in these characters is where they differ from those archetypes the most. But overall, I would say, yes, these men are fairly loyal to these archetypes that they're placed in. And they're both terribly dynamic, but it's definitely at different levels. Obviously, Aeneas is much more action based, whereas Jake is a little bit more contemplative. And so it was really interesting kind of seeing the ways in which they break those molds and do share some commonalities. And lastly, thank you so much for listening. I